Hello and welcome to ThePrint. I'm Shubham Batra, Senior Associate Editor at ThePrint, and with me today is Secretary at the Department of Investment and Public Asset Management. Welcome, sir. So I was reading somewhere yesterday that since the economic reforms began in 1991, the disinvestment target has been met only in 6 financial years. What seems to be the problem lying here, sir? I mean, what are the macro issues that you have to deal with? I know there's a target that's given to you. Maybe you're not working around the target. Your focus is much more than that. But what are some of the issues that you think are facing in meeting these targets year over year?
No, I think I can't say, since 91, there have been different changes in the disinvestment policy from the minority stake sale and to the strategic disinvestment during the NDA government, and followed by, emphasis only on minority stake sale in the UPA government, and subsequently both sides and emphasis on listing as well as on strategic disinvestment in the NDA government now. So there have been, disinvestment has a long history, and I don't want to go into that. Basically, it's a market-driven exercise, and many a time it has been looked at as actually a fiscal thing. Mostly that you have a certain gap between the revenue and expenditure. You project a certain fiscal deficit, so therefore you would like to meet that gap from disinvestment, which is basically as an accounting entry called miscellaneous capital receipts. So now, since it's dependent on the market transactions, then obviously it will, be having vicissitudes of the market will also tell upon that, to what extent you are able to do and complete those transactions.
Because a lot of times when we talk about disinvestment, the first thought, it's so closely linked to the target, but what we don't realize is that disinvestment or private strategic sales, these happen for a reason. What, according to you, why are we so fixated on a target?
No, I think, some target is important, but I think the target needs to be realistic and moderate, and also there is nothing actually stops from achieving the target or getting more.
True.
See, the question is that unlike an expenditure entry, which requires an authorization from Parliament, for the receipts, the Consolidated Fund of India can actually handle any amount of receipts.
Exactly.
So there's not an issue. You can always say that you are going to do X, but you can end up in doing 2X as well.
Yeah, true.
But as a part of the overall budgeting framework, as a gap-filling approach, basically if you are having one number which does it well, is a disinvestment. Unfortunately, the disinvestment is not based on any specific law, the text law that the citizens have to pay.
Agreed.
It's actually a two-way transactions on the contrary. It's something that you would actually seek to disinvest, and there'll be somebody who will be seek to actually pick up. So the disinvestment means that on one side we are shedding, and the other side somebody is accepting. So the two sides of the coin, and obviously it will have the market vicissitudes, the ups and downs will impact it, because that may also impact the bidder's interest. In the strategic side, it is actually all the more a little difficult also, because as you know that the privatization, as we talk about strategic disinvestment, where we have management control being passed on, that's something which we are now sort of beginning to do after about 20 years. So we had a long hiatus, and that's also quite a contested topic, because it's not, it really requires a meeting of the minds of several stakeholders before a successful disinvestment happens. And but more importantly, it's the process itself is fairly long, because it's actually an open competitive bidding process, unlike the private M&A deals, which could be bilateral. In the government system, we have to be above board. It has to be open, transparent, fair, and price discovery has to be through a bidding process. Then multi-layered system have to go into it. There has to be professional valuers to help us in doing it. And finally, there has to be a closure transaction. We do face litigation quite often.
Agreed.
And all these obstacles need to be crossed. Then there are SEBI rules in case of listed companies. They got to be met as well. So there is a certain M&A timeline normally for the private sector, a little more for the public sector, disinvestment and M&A transaction. And therefore, we have to be mindful that, this would be, some of the transactions will actually might materialize during the year that you intend to. Some of them might not. And therefore, we should have the flexibility in the pipeline to handle that.
You've raised some of very good issues, sir, while you gave that answer. How do you deal with issues when some people criticize the bureaucracy, saying that privatization or strategic sale, the bureaucracy is actually selling the crown jewels of the country? How do you deal with some of those issues that come your way?
See, if you look at from the point of view of economy, all the assets are in the economy. And in fact, if you see the debt capital, which is also coming from, you and me or everyone, their savings, they get intermediate through the banking system. So let us look at the economy. In the economy, we should be able to say the enterprises need to be managed at the hands of the economic agents, which are in the best position to manage them. Now, government certainly has a huge role in providing certain level of services. For example, the sovereign services. For example, the law and order, the judicial services, the services of, poverty alleviation, for example, rural infrastructure, where there are no markets. Now, markets are not, if it is a public health issue, if it is, for example, corona, epidemic, and we have a pandemic and we need to vaccinate people, health, education, midday meals program. So there are several, social security, farmers, welfare. Now you need to have multiple things on the plate of the government. On top of it also infrastructure, roads. So these are public goods and the goods with externalities that the government should be more invested in. Also the sovereign functions. Now in the production of goods and services, there are economic agents which are, buying and selling. And they should discover that price in the market. And they should also be constantly changing their supplies and according to the demand. So I think it requires a certain level of decision making and flexibility, which sometimes the public sector enterprises might not have because of the structure in which they are operating. So businesses typically are handled in the business situation more effectively rather than in the government situation. That is the ground on which the privatization would help. If you would see even the policy of economic reforms, one of the big policy reform has been that you have allowed more and more role of private sector, where hitherto the role was reserved only for public sector. Even from the point of view of constitution, you have a freedom to take up a profession. That's an essential fundamental right. You may have certain thing that, the state can say that you ought not be doing illegal things, illegal professions. But right to profession, right to produce goods and services is a fundamental right with, of course, reasonable restrictions. Now, to that extent, if we curtail that you should not be producing, this ought to be producing in public sector, not in private sector. This was a philosophy earlier. But now I think given the present context of the economy, there are economic agents which can produce goods and services. And in any case, if the goods have to be supplied, they have to be demanded as well.
True.
So at the end of the day, we are all parts of the economic agent. So therefore, if the state sells the shares, because it comes into the companies come in and you create the shares in order to produce something. And you have also right to exit and divest those shares. So I don't think there should be a very big problem around that.
You earlier, in one of the earlier answers, you were explaining how generally people are looking at disinvestment only to fill up the fiscal gap particularly. I want to talk a bit about this year's target. I know people have said it's conservative, it's unrealistic. From where I see it, from the entire fiscal point of view, the sense one gets is that I think the government now wants to reduce their dependence on privatization or disinvestment. This can function separately, but this should not be the means to depend on when it comes to meeting the numbers, because that is where towards the end of the year the criticism comes that there is going to be a shortfall because disinvestment target hasn't been met. Your views, sir, on this?
I think reasonability of numbers is extremely important. On the last 2-3 years, there has been a very conscious attempt in the government of bringing in numbers which are more credible. Also, if you would recall, last year, the off-budget borrowing, several off-budget borrowings and liabilities were cleared off.
True.
More notably in the case of FCI. And similarly, no such off-budget borrowings or off-budget items have been taken this year. So
the accounts are transparent.
The accounts are not only thing and more. Similarly, I think we should be mindful of the fact that now, in case of disinvestment, we have two major constraints. One is that the easy pickings have gone, because last 6 years, 3.5 lakh crore has been divested, mostly through the stake sale. Even we have about done 66,000 crore in about 8 strategic divestment transactions. But they have been more in the nature of, selling our shares of one public sector company and giving to another. I think that's that particular approach may be, good for putting fiscal numbers, but it is not really aimed at the reforms at which we have thought that disinvestment would bring in. Because ultimately, nothing changes much except, the buyer changing hands. It remains in the public sector, government receives some money, but the productivity potential, the employment potential that we seek from those enterprises remains untapped.
So what seems to be the focus going forward for the Department of Investment and Public Asset Management? Are we focusing entirely on privatization, or are we going to see some bit of disinvestment also happening parallelly? What is the focus of the department now?
No, I think primarily we are saying that it is a strategic disinvestment, and which we have said under the new PSU policy. So government has transparently brought about a new PSU policy in the last year, February 2021. And there, there is a certain vision, which will also, over a period of time, it will be implemented. You have to keep in mind the timing and the feasibility of the transaction, also the interest of market. And subject to that, there are also other things like listing. For example, we are doing an LIC IPO, which is actually for the first time bringing one of the largest financial institutions to the market. There is no question of privatization. This is something which is going to remain under government control, by law, because we will always retain 51%. And even within first 5 years, we will have only maximum 25% of divestment. But this will bring in not only the opportunity for several investors of a very good asset like LIC is, and trying to actually be an investor or a shareholder in that in the corporation, but also give certain receipts to the government as well. So it meets both the purposes, and I think these kind of things, wherever we have an opportunities, are also part of the government's investment policy.
So where are we? If you could give us just an update about where are we with the whole IPO process, and just to add another company, which is BPCL. If you could update our viewers on how far have we reached on bringing out the IPO for LIC and strategic disinvestment of BPCL?
And the LIC IPO, we are intending to have it in the March, and most likely our DRHP will be filed in the next week.
Okay. And so for BPCL, because the reports generally say that there are interested buyers, but they're looking for strategic partners, and that has sort of taken time. What are the issues related to BPCL disinvestment currently?
I think we were hopeful that BPCL sale would be completed during the year. There has been some delay because it's a large transaction.
True.
And it needs a large size of resources on the part of bidders in order to bid. So we are at the stage where we are, seeking them to complete the due diligence and, make financial bids. But there has been, some critical issues happening on the energy transition side or climate change side in terms of this particular sector. So I think that's forcing some of the bidders to evaluate or look at this, because such large transactions will require consortia and
Agreed.
so on. So I think there could be some difficulties from their side, for which they are not really coming up for ready for the financial bid.
But are we going to start the process all over again, or are we now at a stage where we can now seek financial bids?
No, at the moment, as I said, that we are not being able to persuade them to make financial bids yet.
Okay.
And we would get a better idea from our transaction advisors on this, and then we'll take the next course of action in the future.
The other announcement that Finance Minister had made last year was regarding the privatization of 2 public sector banks. We've seen a lot of resistance. There was a nationwide strike last year. Now, these challenges will remain. How will you tackle all these issues, sir? Because they are not going anytime soon. I mean, the process may be hold up for a while, but then I'm sure it's going to start again. It's a budget announcement. How will you ensure that there is a smooth ride for privatization of the 2 public sector banks?
I think on that side, I think we have to also, you need to actually check with Department of Financial Services, because I think there is a need for a legislative change, and that has to go to the Parliament. So once that is through, then I think our department's role will begin.
But the other issues like union strikes and everything, how does one deal with those, sir?
Well, I think that is the issue. I think we need to create awareness that the privatization is not intended to take away jobs. In fact, privatization intended to actually increase the jobs, sustainable jobs. There could be a difficulty that if the organizations or the enterprises do not change fast enough, they may actually get obsolete. It has happened. If you do not, do the things at the right time, because you always need, in any business, you always require constant capital infusion. You require productivity of capital employed. You need sustainability of business from the point of view of sometimes climate change. You need to change tax. You need to close down some businesses and open new opportunities. So business is not easy, because it will always go with a demand supply in a competitive environment.
True.
There is an environment within the domestic thing. You got to competing, and public sector is to compete with private sector today. So you will lose business if you are not keeping pace. Then you have an international business, which is also competing. The goods and services can come from outside. So we are living in an open economy. When we are exporting goods from outside the world, we are also importing goods and services from outside the world. In a dynamic environment, there is always a need for a constant change. So there's nothing static about it. So we cannot have a situation where said we had this before, so that's going to continue that. We need to have reskilling in many places. We have to move to do different technologies. All this requires a certain level of business skills, which public sector managers may not always have.
I have the two questions that I have. One is, what are the learnings? I mean, you came into the department, I think, in 2019, and you handled successfully the Air India privatization. It was a very complex exercise and people weren't expecting it. But kudos to the department, you made it happen, sir. What are some of the learnings from...
First of all, I would say that, this was really a team effort. So it's not, I don't think that, you should give the credit to the team. Because there have been, our system is a collegial decision making. There is a Ministry of Civil Aviation who were hand in hand with us. There's a Department of Public Enterprises, Department of Expenditure, Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, Department of Legal Affairs. They were always with us. So to do that, to understand, to help us, because it's a so we
Agreed.
cannot say that the department is to be given full. It's the whole
joint effort
system that we have designed. which is yielding results. And also, I think we have been lucky that we got the bidders who participated and all that, because as I said that, you can't clap from one hand. If we want to sell something, there should be somebody interested in buying.
Yes. No, so my question essentially, sir, is that what are the learnings from this process which can really help us in undertaking transactions going forward?
I think the first learning has been that we have to be we should not have very fixed thinking. While the process is robust, we have a clear, open, competitive bidding process. But in terms of structuring of the transaction, every transaction has its own peculiarities. Like, for example, in case of Air India, we had to have the enterprise value bidding approach, because initially we were always trying a fixed debt approach. Now the fixed debt approach was not yielding results. Another very reason was that Air India had a completely unsustainable debt. And this debt was not taken not to only fund the planes or assets. It was taken only in lieu of equity, so to say. That means what would have come as an equity to fund the losses was coming in the form of a debt which was guaranteed by the government. And we were into some kind of a spiral there, that we had guaranteed debt which was there, but there were no underlying assets of equivalent size. So this kind of situation, trying to actually fix something, and particularly when the aviation market was undergoing a big change, was not yielding results, where we said that, okay, let us bid on an enterprise value, equity and debt put together. Because the equity of Air India itself was minus 35,000 crore. So what do you do for an enterprise which has equity of minus 35,000 crore?
Exactly.
So this is one. The second part was that, so making it clear, analyzing the thing, getting professional advice, structuring the whole thing well. The second thing was also you are able to communicate it in that manner to the potential bidders. Because if you do not communicate, I mean, you would have to they would say that we are not understood. We are not understood. I think the third was that there was a lot of lack of capacity in terms of learning in our system, because privatization was there in 2002, 2004, and there was a very big institutional gap, because we were doing the market sales of different kind, which they require a very different skill set. So this new skill set of learning M&A transactions, they had to be imbibed through a certain process of internally learning from each other, learning from professionals, and so on. And also the fact that finally the decision making and all the different layers which were there, I think they were prepared to give the right decisions at the right time.
I think the process that you've set up of going up till alternate mechanism, that structure was also required.
Yes, very much so, because I think it requires, as I said, flexible decision making. Sometimes issues crop up, and those issues are there. Something can be solved at certain level, something has to be scaled up to the next level. But the structures are available that can actually meet at short notices and then resolve those things. And there is a greater deal of comfort in the whole system that, yes, we can move forward in this manner.
So my very last question is related to the asset monetization pipeline. Last year, we'd heard the announcements regarding the same. This year, the budget was missing announcements regarding asset monetization. I know around the year, things have happened. But what are we expecting? What sort of money are we expecting to flow in from asset monetization?
Yeah, first of all, let me say that the asset monetization is different from actually receipt of money to the government, which disinvestment is, when we are saying that even in disinvestment, if I were to disinvestment Numaligarh refinery, for example, or for that matter, Nilachal Ispat, the money will not directly come to the government. It comes to the companies that their subsidiaries are. and maybe we get it in the form of a dividend later. And mind you, we have received about 40,000 crore of dividend.
I know, I saw it on the website.
And I think nobody is talking about it, but that's also a substantial amount of money that DIPAM generates from the enterprises in the form of dividend, because these public sector companies are performing, they are producing profits, they're producing dividends, and those dividends are not only distributed to the government as they're in proportion, the other people, those who have got their shares, also get those dividends. But coming back to this point of
asset monetization,
these are basically to the triggering of the capex cycle. And this was announced, last year, because that was a peculiar situation on post-pandemic, and certain things had to be triggered in terms of triggering capex cycle. So now, if the public sector enterprises have to invest, they can, in the capex, they can actually borrow, because if they seek too much of money from the government, it may not be available as a certain form of equity. So they have to raise capital. They have to raise capital from the market, or they have to go to the banks for a debt. Or there are alternative mechanisms. They can do the asset monetization, which means that, for example, if you go for an InvIT or a TOT, you actually circulate that capital. You get that money upfront by parting with a certain concession for a certain period. The asset belongs to you. It comes back to you after the end of the concession. In the meanwhile, you've got the upfront money. That money gets reinvested into capex.
Okay, so the money doesn't come to the consolidated fund of India.
So the money doesn't come in here. So therefore, the budget actually has not talked about it this year, but it's a continuation policy. And subsequent to the budget last year, we had an announcement, is what is called a national monetization pipeline. And Niti Aayog is monitoring it. And all these things we have this year itself, about 26,000 crore of asset monetization already accomplished, and more are in the offing.
20,000 crore of asset monetization.
26,000 crore.
All right, so that's all the questions we had. Thank you for joining us at Print, and many congratulations for the budget.